Welcome, friends. Today we begin with a story that sounds simple on the surface. A story about wood, about lumber, about two neighbors who share the longest undefended border on Earth. But underneath, it's a story about economic myths, political theater, and the high price of believing in slogans instead of systems. When Donald Trump stood before the cameras and declared that America didn't need Canada's lumber, many shrugged it off as another one of his showman's flourishes. After all, this was the man who had once claimed the U.S. didn't need foreign cars, foreign steel, or foreign energy. He promised to make America self-reliant, to reclaim an imagined industrial past. But this time, it wasn't just a speech. It was a policy. Within weeks, Washington imposed sweeping tariffs on imported softwood lumber, citing national security as though a 2x4 were now a matter of defense. The markets responded faster than politics ever could. Lumber prices shot past $650 per thousand board feet, the highest in years. Builders, contractors, and developers across the country began to panic. Projects stalled. Costs ballooned. The same American families that the tariffs were supposed to protect soon found themselves priced out of their own homes. You see, friends, the U.S. imports roughly 1/3 of the lumber it uses, and 85% of that comes from Canada. So by taxing Canadian wood, Washington had effectively taxed its own construction industry. But let's pause there, because this is not just about lumber. This is about how ideology can outpace reality. The argument went like this. Canada was dumping lumber, selling it too cheaply, hurting American jobs. The solution? Punish the imports, raise tariffs, force U.S. producers to fill the gap. But the numbers told a different story. Even if every sawmill in the United States ran at full capacity, every worker, every shift, every blade turning the country would still face a shortfall of more than 3 billion board feet per year. There simply isn't enough domestic supply to meet demand. And so what began as a promise to protect American workers ended up as a tax on American builders, a burden on families, and a gift to inflation. Lumber prices ripple through everything from housing to renovation to public infrastructure. Every dollar added to a beam becomes $10 on a mortgage. Analysts warned that for every $10,000 increase in the cost of a home, millions of potential buyers are priced out entirely. That's not protection. That's punishment dressed as patriotism. Meanwhile, the supposed villain in this story, Canada, reacted very differently. Ottawa didn't retaliate with equal fury. It didn't mirror Washington's anger. Instead, it reorganized. Prime Minister Mark Carney unveiled a $500 million support package to help lumber producers diversify beyond the U.S. market. Soon, another $1.2 billion followed to shield the sector from anti-dumping duties. In British Columbia, Minister Ravi Parmar set an ambitious goal: redirect at least 10% of lumber exports away from the United States and into Asia, Europe, and emerging markets. Let me tell you, that wasn't just economic management. It was strategic adaptation. Canada understood something Washington didn't, that power in today's economy lies not in isolation, but in resilience. When one door closes, you build another. When a neighbor builds walls, you build bridges somewhere else. As Canada restructured its industry, the U.S. economy began to feel the weight of its own contradictions. Tariffs meant to defend jobs in forestry didn't create new ones. Mills in Oregon, Montana, and Alabama still struggled with aging equipment, labor shortages, and high costs. Even with tariff protection, domestic lumber couldn't compete with the scale or efficiency of Canadian producers. You can't legislate capacity into existence, and that's the point. Protectionism may win applause in rallies, but it rarely builds factories. It builds illusions. The illusion that an economy can stand alone in a world of interdependence. The illusion that a tariff can replace decades of underinvestment in industry. The illusion that nationalism can substitute for strategy. What Trump called strength was in reality fragility. He mistook economic entanglement for weakness when in truth it was the basis of stability. The lumber tariff was not a defense of American labor. It was an admission of how far the U.S. had drifted from productive self-sufficiency. And as the months unfolded, that truth became harder to ignore. Prices rose. Builders delayed projects. Homebuyers gave up. Inflation crept further into daily life. A trade war dressed up as patriotism turned into a domestic tax on ordinary people, and Canada, calm, methodical, quietly confident, began to turn crisis into opportunity. But that, my friends, is just the beginning of this story. Because what followed would reveal something even deeper about how one nation's insecurity can become another's advantage, and how a political gesture can reshape entire industries on both sides of the border. Let's pick up where we left off, at that strange crossroads where protectionism meets its own reflection. When the United States decided to tax Canadian lumber, it expected a fight, but instead of retaliation, Canada offered strategy. Ottawa didn't storm the gates of Washington with tariffs of its own. It turned inward toward reinvention. Prime Minister Mark Carney framed it not as punishment, but as opportunity. Canada's $1.7 billion response package, yes, that's in US dollars, was more than financial aid. It was a pivot, a way to transform dependency into independence. The plan aimed to make Canada less vulnerable to Washington's trade whims by building new export corridors, new buyers, and new industries around its wood. And here's where the irony deepens. For decades, roughly 90% of Canadian lumber exports had flowed straight into the United States, a one-way relationship as predictable as gravity. Canada supplied, America consumed. But tariffs snapped that gravitational pull. Suddenly, Canadian firms were forced to look beyond their southern neighbor. And what they found was a world eager to buy. South Korea, Vietnam, India, the United Kingdom, all expanded their lumber imports from Canada. Japan increased its purchases by more than a quarter in a single year, citing the reliability of Canadian supply. European partners followed suit. Trade agreements were signed, ports were modernized, and sawmills in British Columbia and Alberta began shipping east and west instead of just south. Think about that transformation. The policy that was meant to isolate Canada actually globalized it. While Washington preached independence, it was Canada that achieved it. Ottawa didn't need to declare, "Make Canada great again." It simply went to work. Meanwhile, across the border, the mood turned from patriotic to painful. American builders began to feel trapped in a policy maze. The cost of lumber didn't just rise, it exploded. Each uptick in tariffs added hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars to every new home. Analysts at Brookings called it what it was, a regressive tax on the working class. The same voters promised economic nationalism were now paying the bill for it. You see, tariffs are like mirrors. They don't create wealth, they redistribute pain. The price hikes that were supposed to hit foreigners were instead hitting Americans at the checkout line, the construction site, and the mortgage office. And all the while, Canadian exporters, shielded, diversified, and more efficient, found themselves in a stronger long-term position. In British Columbia, provincial grants helped mills modernize at ports like Vancouver and Prince Rupert. Investments poured into logistics upgrades to handle rising shipments to Asia. Each container that left those docks wasn't just filled with timber. It carried a message that Canada could adapt faster than America could politicize. And here's the heart of it. By raising walls, Washington taught its neighbor how to climb. The tariffs forced Canada to imagine a world beyond American dependency, and in doing so, Ottawa reshaped its entire industrial identity. The lumber that once symbolized colonial trade now became a symbol of sovereignty, green, efficient, export-driven, and future-focused. But let's not romanticize it. Canada didn't escape without cost. Tariffs hurt, mills closed. Workers worried. For many, the transition was painful. Yet, because policy met purpose, that pain became transformation. The government stepped in not just with money, but with a vision to make Canadian lumber the green steel of the global economy. Engineered timber, sustainable forestry, and carbon neutral exports. This wasn't a reaction, it was a reinvention. Compare that with Washington's approach reaction without reinvention. The U.S. forestry sector was told it would boom under tariff protection. It didn't. Domestic sawmills, already operating near full capacity, couldn't scale up fast enough to fill the supply gap. The result? Higher prices, not higher production. Builders halted projects. Consumers bore the cost. And yet, the administration insisted it was working. Working for whom? Certainly not for the millions priced out of housing. Not for construction firms drowning in costs. Not for small town mills still starved of investment. Protectionism, it turned out, protected very little except political slogans. This is the paradox of Trump's economic nationalism. It treats interdependence as weakness and self-isolation as strength. But in practice, it does the opposite. It weakens the domestic economy while empowering competitors abroad. Every tariff designed to make America strong instead teaches others how to thrive without it. By the end of 2024, the contrast between the two nations was undeniable. Canada's lumber sector was more diversified, more modern, and more profitable than before. The United States, on the other hand, faced an affordability crisis spreading from the housing market into the broader economy. And as the numbers began to turn against Washington, even supporters of the tariff started to whisper the unspeakable. Maybe, just maybe, the entire policy had backfired. By now, the pattern is clear. The more Washington tried to protect its economy from the world, the more the world learned to protect itself from Washington. It's an irony of empire. When power turns inward, it begins to erode from within. And nowhere was that clearer than in the lumber crisis that unfolded across America. By mid-2025, the housing market, already strained by inflation, labor shortages, and high interest rates, met its final blow. Lumber prices hovered near $765 per thousand board feet, a number that sounds abstract until you translate it. That meant every new home cost $10,000 to $15,000 more to build, with no improvement in quality. For millions of working families, that difference was enough to turn the dream of ownership into a lifetime of rent. You see, when policymakers in Washington framed tariffs as defense, they ignored the fact that America's economy isn't an island, it's a network. When you pull one thread, the whole fabric tightens. Builders delay projects, workers lose hours, local economies stall. It's not just lumber that gets more expensive, it's life itself. The cost of furniture, renovations, schools, public housing, everything touched by wood climbed. And here's the cruelest twist. The American lumber industry, the very sector these tariffs were meant to protect, didn't revive. Mills in the U.S. South and Pacific Northwest struggled under the weight of aging equipment and thin profit margins. Even with tariff protection, they couldn't match Canada's scale or efficiency. The promised revival of American sawmills turned out to be a mirage. Production stayed flat, jobs remained scarce, and the benefits flowed not to workers, but to a handful of large corporations insulated from competition. Meanwhile, north of the border, something remarkable was happening. Canada's lumber producers didn't just recover, they evolved. They used those higher global prices, ironically fueled by U.S. tariffs, to reinvest. Companies like West Fraser, Canfor, and Interfor began modernizing mills, upgrading to automation and sustainable technologies, and entering markets once dominated by European producers. Canada, once the quiet supplier, became the innovator. In Vancouver and Prince Rupert, expanded port terminals began handling record volumes of exports bound for Asia and Europe. Each shipment was a quiet rebuttal to the idea that Canada needed the U.S. to survive. Japan's import surge confirmed it. Germany and South Korea signed new trade deals emphasizing low-carbon building materials. In diplomatic terms, Canada had achieved what Washington only talked about: true global leverage built on reliability and trust. Let's pause here, because this, my friends, is the heart of the story. While Washington wielded tariffs like weapons, Canada turned its wounds into armor. While America tried to protect itself from the world, Canada built partnerships across it. It's not just economics, it's psychology. One nation reacted with fear, the other with strategy, and the numbers bear it out. By the end of 2025, Canadian lumber exports outside the U.S. had grown by nearly 20%. Domestic reinvestment was booming, fueled by both government support and private confidence. Mills reopened, not to depend on America, but to serve a broader world hungry for green materials. Ottawa's bet that cooperation could outperform confrontation was paying off. Meanwhile, Washington's reality was less triumphant. Homebuilders warned that shortages were approaching crisis levels. Infrastructure projects faced months of delay. State governments, already stretched thin, saw budgets swell from unexpected material costs. Even conservative think tanks began to admit what economists had warned from day one: tariffs don't make an industry competitive. They make it complacent. And that's the tragedy of protectionism. It mistakes walls for strength. It assumes that by closing doors, you can force progress, but economies don't grow under siege. They grow through exchange. You can't protect jobs by making everything more expensive. You can't build wealth by cutting yourself off from the world that sustains it. It's time we face it. The tariffs were never about lumber. They were about narrative, about the image of toughness, of independence, of America first. But in practice, that slogan became a policy of America isolated a country trying to compete with yesterday's tools in tomorrow's world. And what makes this story so powerful and so tragic is that it reveals a deeper contradiction in the Trump era's economic vision. The promise of national revival was built on nostalgia, not capacity. The idea that America could simply turn back the clock to an industrial age that no longer exists. Lumber, steel, coal, these weren't just materials. They were symbols of a fantasy. Meanwhile, the world moved on. Automation reshaped production. Green technology transformed materials. Global trade rebalanced toward Asia and Europe. And in this shifting landscape of Canada, the country dismissed as dependent, became a model of adaptation. It's a warning when a nation clings to its past instead of preparing for its future, it loses both. The tariffs meant to defend America's economy ended up accelerating its decline in competitiveness, not with a crash, but with a slow, grinding whisper of missed opportunities. The empire is fading not with a bang, but with a policy memo. Now that we've traced the roots and the reach of this so-called lumber war, it's time to draw the curtain and see what's really behind it. Because what began as a trade dispute between neighbors became a parable of our entire era of how politics manipulates economics and how ordinary people end up paying for a myth. The tariffs were sold to the public as patriotic, a way to take back control, to defend American jobs, to make the nation self-sufficient again. But in truth, they revealed how deep the dependency runs and how little political theater can change it. The United States cannot simply wall itself off from Canada or from any major partner without consequence. Its economy is woven from global threads: steel, chips, oil, wood. And when you pull one, the entire fabric shakes. When Trump declared that we don't need their lumber, it sounded defiant. But economics doesn't bend to defiance. Within months, prices rose, supply chains strained, and every American family dreaming of a home found that dream pushed further away. The housing market became the mirror of the larger problem. Inflated costs, stagnant wages, and policy built on slogans rather than structure. The tariff meant to defend ended up attacking the very foundation of the middle class. And yet, look north, Canada, instead of falling, found its footing. Ottawa didn't just survive the pressure, it transformed it. With federal support, the lumber sector diversified, modernized, and internationalized. New ports, new buyers, new industries emerged. The same timber once destined for U.S. suburbs began flowing to Seoul, Berlin, Mumbai, and Tokyo. Canadian lumber became not a symbol of dependency, but of adaptability, a lesson in quiet resilience. It's striking, isn't it? One nation shouted about sovereignty while the other practiced it. The United States tried to show power through punishment. Canada showed it through patience. And in the end, patience won. But this isn't just about Canada's triumph. It's about America's reflection, because the problem runs deeper than lumber or tariffs. It's about an economic model that treats trade partners as enemies, that mistakes competition for conflict, and that uses nationalism to mask the erosion of real industrial capacity. You see, when leaders frame the economy as a battlefield, everyone becomes collateral. Consumers pay more. Workers lose stability. Businesses face uncertainty. And the supposed victory protecting domestic jobs vanishes into the fog of unintended consequences. Tariffs can be a tool, yes, but they are not a strategy. A strategy requires investment, planning, education, and cooperation, none of which come from angry tweets or rally chants. And the cost is visible. Half-built homes across Texas and Ohio, builders waiting for shipments that never come, young families squeezed by interest rates and material prices. These are not numbers. They are lives distorted by policy. The dream of the working class, the very people this policy claimed to champion, has been priced out of reach. Meanwhile, in British Columbia and Alberta, mills hum with new technology. Engineers are hired, exports expand, and a new narrative takes root, that of a small country using intelligence to outmaneuver ideology. It's not just a trade win, it's a shift in global confidence. Canada now stands as a reliable supplier in a world hungry for stability. And that reliability, that steady, sustainable trust is worth more than any tariff can buy. So what do we learn from this? We learn that protectionism without production is just theater, that slogans can't replace systems. That true economic power comes not from isolation, but from integration, from being indispensable, not unreachable. Let me tell you, it's time we face it. The empire's problem isn't that others are rising, it's that it forgot how to adapt. While others innovate, America legislates nostalgia. While others diversify, it doubles down on division. The tariff war over lumber wasn't an isolated mistake, it was a symptom of a deeper crisis in vision. But crises, if we're brave enough, can also become turning points. They can force nations to confront what they've ignored, the need for industrial renewal, green investment, global cooperation, and honest leadership that tells people the truth, not what they want to hear. And that truth is simple. No wall, no tariff, no political slogan can substitute for real economic strength. Strength comes from building from schools that train workers, from factories that innovate, from alliances that share, not hoard. The lumber war should have taught us that lesson. It showed that independence without interdependence is an illusion, and that arrogance in policy can turn quickly into impotence in practice. If America wants to rebuild, it must start by listening, learning, and remembering that leadership is not about who shouts the loudest, but who adapts the fastest. So, friends, as we close this story, let's carry its echo forward. Protectionism made the powerful feel strong for a moment, but cooperation made the prudent strong for a generation. It's time to choose which kind of strength we believe in. Share this, talk about it. Let's face the truth together.